A Boeing 747 with 524 people on board was flying at 24,000 feet when suddenly the tail of the aircraft separated in midair. The flight crew had no controls left, nor any direction. There was no oxygen or air pressure in the cabin. But despite all this, how did they keep the plane in the air for the next 45 minutes? This is the story of human courage, engineering failure, and a flight with absolutely no control left. That flight was Japan Air 123. Welcome back to Story Spark TV videos, dear viewers. On August 12, 1985, a Japan Airlines Boeing 747 stood at Tokyo's Haneda Airport, offloading passengers. Exactly 1 hour later, it was the takeoff again for Osaka. Thousands of people travel daily from Tokyo to Osaka, but today was exceptionally busy because people were going to their hometowns for the Japanese holiday season, Obon. After the aircraft was cleaned at Haneda Airport, 509 passengers and 15 crew members boarded Japan Air 123. For the crew, it was a routine flight, but the passengers were unaware that the aircraft they were about to travel in was a victim of a years-old weakness, a horrific issue that neither the pilots nor the flight engineer knew about. Due to the busy schedule, this particular Boeing 747 was on its sixth flight of the day. Regarding the three cockpit crew, the 49-year-old Captain Masami Takahama, with a total of 12,000 hours of experience, would lead the flight. The first officer was 39-year-old Yutaka Sasaki, whose promotion process to captain was already underway, and this flight was crucial for his promotion. He had a total of 3,900 hours of experience. The third cockpit crew member was 46-year-old flight engineer Hiroshi Fukuda, whose job was to sit behind the pilot's seats and monitor the aircraft's technical issues. Looking at the cockpit crew's competence, it wouldn't be wrong to say that the lives of 509 passengers were in very safe hands, and was the aircraft as capable as the crew? We would find out shortly. At 6:04 p.m., the doors of Japan Air 123 were closed, and the pilot began taxiing the aircraft to runway 15L. This was going to be a very short flight from Tokyo to Osaka, only 1 hour and 12 minutes. This meant that by the time the aircraft reached its cruising altitude of 24,000 feet, preparations for descent would begin. The weather in Tokyo was perfectly clear, but several thunderstorms were developing across Japan that day, due to which the pilot was instructed not to fly directly from Tokyo to Osaka, but to go over the ocean. Now Japan Air 123 was fully prepared for takeoff on runway 15L. At 6:12 p.m., after receiving permission from the control tower, the pilot pushed the aircraft's thrust levers forward and successfully took off. Everything that happened up to this point was completely normal, but exactly 12 minutes after takeoff over Sagami Bay, a mysterious sound occurred inside the aircraft, and simultaneously, a hole opened up in the rearmost part, the tail section. The passengers who were excited about going home had their excitement turned into fear in the blink of an eye, because the hole caused a commotion in the cabin, and loose objects began to be rapidly sucked towards that hole. All this happened so quickly that it was difficult to even guess what had occurred. The noise was so loud that it was heard in the cockpit as well. In the cockpit voice recorder, this sound felt something like this. It's important to know here that as the plane gains altitude, the outside air becomes thinner and the oxygen level also decreases. To counter this, artificial pressure is filled inside the cabin, which is almost equal to the atmospheric pressure at ground level. This means that at 24,000 feet, the outside pressure is low and the pressure inside the cabin is high, and this higher air pressure is constantly exerting force from the inside on the cabin walls. The plane's cabin is kept completely airtight so that this artificial pressure does not leak in any way. But if even a small part of the cabin is weak, the air pressure can tear through that spot and create a hole, which would cause the cabin's artificial pressure to be lost, and the passenger's health could deteriorate. Additionally, the low oxygen level could cause difficulty in breathing. Something similar happened on Japan Air 123, but so far both pilots were unaware of it. In the cockpit voice recorder, they were heard talking to each other, sometimes mentioning the landing gear door breaking, and sometimes thinking that the sound might have come from the engine. But the reality was that the rearmost part of the fuselage had separated from the aircraft, taking the rudder with it. Due to the tail of the fuselage bursting, the cabin pressure could no longer be maintained, but the rudder, which is the part located on the tail, being gone meant that the aircraft was now going to go out of the control of both pilots. The rudder's job is to control the yaw movement of the aircraft. When any aircraft takes a turn, this movement is called roll movement. The movement of the nose up or nose down is called pitch, while the horizontal direction of the nose to the left or right is called yaw movement. In simple words, Japan Air 123 at about 24,000 feet would neither be able to turn properly nor align itself with the runway during landing due to the absence of the rudder. But even more dangerous was the fact that both pilots had no idea that the rudder was gone. The aircraft was no longer stable as before, and it began to sway left and right on its own, which the awful pilot was unable to control. On the ground below, a person noticed the aircraft's movement and sensed something was wrong, so they took a photo. In this photo, it is clearly visible that the rudder part is missing from the tail. Before both pilots could understand anything, the cabin crew was heard making an announcement, instructing passengers to fasten their seatbelts. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the captain sensed something was wrong, so he first set the transponder frequency to 703, which is a universal distress signal. This meant that all control towers would now know that Japan Air 123 was in an emergency situation. The captain decided to land the aircraft back in Tokyo. But was the plane even capable of doing so? First, he informed the control tower about the emergency situation and requested permission for return landing in Tokyo. The control tower gave the captain permission to take a 90 degrees turn and land in Tokyo. The first officer, who was at the controls, turned the plane to the right at 40 degrees angle, but both pilots became even more terrified to see that the plane's angle was much greater than 40 degrees. At this point, the captain was heard shouting at the first officer to reduce the bank angle, but the angle did not decrease in any way. And the co-pilot tried repeatedly, but the plane was not responding to any of his inputs. Just then, the flight engineer informed both pilots that the hydraulic pressure was decreasing rapidly, and within moments the hydraulic pressure reached zero. This was the point when all three crew members in the cockpit realized that the plane was now out of their control. For those who don't know, let me explain that all the controls of a plane, including the ailerons for left and right turns, the elevators for pitch, and the flaps for reducing speed, are impossible to move by hand during flight, especially when facing headwinds of 1,000 kilometers per h. That's why they are moved with the help of hydraulic pressure. And the tail that broke off Japan Air 123 had also torn some hydraulic pipes with it. This was the reason why the plane's entire hydraulic pressure was now gone and the cockpit controls were just like showpieces. At an altitude of 24,000 feet, Japan Air 123 had become a victim of several problems. The cabin pressure was gone, the oxygen mask had deployed, the controls were disabled due to the loss of hydraulic pressure, and most dangerously, the passengers and pilots were now experiencing hypoxia due to the low pressure. Hypoxia is a condition in which the body's oxygen level decreases, leading to confusion, difficulty in making decisions, slow movements, and even unconsciousness. Just then, the cabin crew was heard making an announcement to put on oxygen masks. August, whatever happened, now Japan Air 123 was severely roll-moving, terrifying the passengers. Both pilots now had control over only one thing, and that was the engine controls. The captain tried to get the plane out of the roll movement using only the engine control. If the aircraft had to be turned right, then the power of the left side engines had to be increased, and if a left turn was needed, the power of the right side engines had to be increased. Similarly, during a roll movement, when the aircraft banked to the right, only by increasing the power of the right engines for a specific time could it be straightened again. Using this technique, the pilots managed to gain considerable control over the aircraft's roll movement. Now their only mission was to get the aircraft back to Tokyo Airport as soon as possible, but before that, the aircraft had to be brought closer to the ground so that the pressure in the cabin could increase. Elevators are usually used for this, but they were now useless due to the lack of hydraulic pressure. Therefore, the captain came up with the idea of lowering the landing gear. The landing gear creates extra drag on the aircraft, which can reduce speed, but these landing gears also open with hydraulic pressure. Therefore, the captain decided to deploy the landing gear using its own weight, and fortunately they did open. Now at 6:45 p.m., Japan Air 123 made a circular turn over the city of Otsuki, and its altitude decreased from 24,000 feet to 13,500 feet, which was a major success for the pilots. Both pressure and oxygen in the cabin improved, but the danger was not yet over. From here, they had to take a righted turn towards Tokyo, but turning the plane using only the engine controls was creating a lot of difficulty for the pilots. If they increased the engine thrust, the plane's nose would go up significantly, which was also reducing speed, and if the speed decreased too much, the plane could stall and crash to the ground. Unwillingly, the aircraft now entered the mountainous region of Japan. At low altitude, turning the aircraft towards Tokyo without controls seemed like an impossible task. At 6:48 p.m., the captain was heard telling the first officer to make a right turn, as there was a mountain ahead. But perhaps making such fine turns using only engine controls was not possible. At this time, various alarms were also heard sounding in the cockpit. Unwillingly, the aircraft had come very far from Tokyo over the mountain range at only 6,800 feet. A few minutes later, at 6:54 p.m., the captain's frustration was clearly evident in his voice, and then finally, 2 minutes later, sounds like these were recorded in the cockpit. Japan Air's plane, while turning, crashed into a mountain due to low altitude. In this accident, only 4 people survived who were sitting on the left side in the center of the cabin. All the remaining crew and passengers perished in this horrific accident. Investigations revealed that 7 years earlier, the tail of the same aircraft had struck the runway during landing. After that, the aircraft remained grounded for several weeks for repairs, and Boeing technicians worked on its repair. Investigations revealed that the technicians had incorrectly installed the tail splice plate. Investigators calculated and stated that this faulty repair could only pressurize the cabin for 11,000 cycles, while Japan Air 123 had completed 12,500 cycles in this condition, and coincidentally on this very day, it could not withstand the pressure. After this accident, investigators put 4 different pilots through the same scenario in a flight simulator, but all 4 pilots crashed the plane, and no pilot could keep the plane in the air for as long as Japan Air 123 remained airborne. This is quite surprising because the pilots in the simulator had 2 very big advantages. One, they knew in advance what the problem was, and second, they had the peace of mind that their lives were not in danger. Considering these conditions, it would not be wrong to say that both pilots of Japan Air 123 tried their best to control the aircraft until their last breath and kept it in the air for 45 minutes. Hopefully, you will also like and share this video from Story Spark TV a lot. Thank you very much for your loving comments, and see you in the next amazing video.